And we are here with Bill Homewood. Bill, thank you so much for being on the Creativity podcast and welcome.
It's always a pleasure to see you, Johannes.
Yeah, me too. Me too. So for those who don't know Bill Homewood, you should, because he's amazing. He has a great and eccentric career. So Bill is not a random guest. He has been a neighbor. He has been a mentor. He has been a source of inspiration for me. That's true. He helped me a lot on many topics. And he's the perfect guest for the Creativity podcast because of his career. That is creativity itself. So he started off as a musician, then he moved into theater, then he was a classical actor for years. He hosted his own show on BBC TV for a children's show, then he went to audio recordings. He won many awards for this. So it's not just a side thing he does, including the audiophile earphones award in the USA. He also won a couple of times the audiobook of the year, and he has been nominated for the Audi 2021. So it's kind of the Oscars for audio recordings from what I understood. And of course, he's also a poet. He's written a couple of amazing books. He's going to tell us all about it, where he finds his inspiration, how he writes his books. And there is so much to talk about. So I'm super excited. And I just wanted to start with how I know Bill, because he's not a random guest, as I said. He lives in the Cévennes in south of France. And my family has a house there, and Bill is our neighbor. So when we go to vacation in the summertime, that's where Bill usually lives. And I think Bill has been inspiration for me because, he's here, so I'm going to talk to him directly. Bill, you're passionate into everything you do. So the first question I want to ask, and seeing all your career and all those different facets and all those different experiences that you have, my question is, how do you put your mind into something until you master it? Because you're very passionate, and when your mind is into something, it's like a laser focus, and you go until as far as you can, basically.
Well, actually, thank you for that amazing introduction. I impressed myself listening to you. Actually, I was talking with, knowing I was going to be talking to you, I was talking with my wife Estelle about this interview, and I said to her, because she said something like you just said about the many things that I've done and to whatever degree I could that I've mastered in my time. And you know, I remember when I was a small boy already that I used to bury myself with projects. I always did. So it's not an effort for me. I'm 74, and I think I've lived 70 of those years with a project. Always, at all times. And when I was younger, I used to recommend to young actors that they have at least 5 projects at any given time. I used to call them balloons, and I used to say, one of those balloons will always come into land while the other 4 are up in the air. And I can truthfully say that I've applied that as a mantra to my own career. Always have a project, always have several balloons in the air, and do a little something for your career every day. That's what I tell students. And at 74, I believe I still do that. But when I was a boy, I remember my father was a congregational minister, a minister of the church. And I remember somebody came to the house and asked, because they knew I painted. I did a lot of painting, and I did posters for local events and so on. I used to design them. And they said, would I do a poster for a month-long festival about the creation the fanciful event as I now see it. And I actually did an 80-meter frieze around a local hall, all the walls covered with this frieze, starting with Noah and going all the way around. I remember painting it obsessively for about 2 or 3 months before it was finished. And then I bought wallpaper, and then we unrolled the wallpaper and put it on the wall. And I think that was my first project that I can remember. Then, of course, I learned to play the guitar. Once I fell in love with the guitar at the age of 14, I didn't think about anything else. I took it to school on my back. I would play it in every break, every lunchtime. I would play it obsessively on the train on the way home from school. I would play it at home all evening. I would listen to guitarists and copy them and so on. I think I've always learned by watching experts. I think I can truthfully say that I am as excited to watch a good electrician or a good plumber at work with their fantastically practiced skills as I am at watching a great singer or a masterful actor on stage. I love professionalism. I love the tidy, organized, and easy practiced hands at work.
The craft.
Yeah, craft. That's my word. I don't like the word art very much. I've said that, I think I said it to you once, but I don't like the word art because if you see, for instance, my craft of acting, if you see it as an art, then you may start to teach it as something ephemeral, something magical. You may start to use what I call the gobbledygook, the quackery of lingo to describe what ought to be described as a craft. I really don't want to be told to be centered. I don't want to pretend to be a plastic bag melting into the floor. What I like is to know where the lights are, know where the audience is, know my lines, and have studied the scene and the script and the writer and so on in order to feel secure. That is a craft. And then if I may, without sounding glib, explain that a little better, if you have 2 carpenters, I mean by carpenters, I mean cabinet makers, ébénistes, rather than charpentier in French. If you have 2 and you give them each the same table to build, you give them the plans and the same timber, one of those tables may be very beautiful and the other one may be perfectly functional, but not as beautiful. Both men are craftsmen, but one of them is an artist. But I am not at all sure that we can teach art. We can make suggestions. So the artist craftsman, he may have noticed the grain of the wood, and he may see a little knot in the wood which looks like a bird, and he may think, I will put that in the middle of the top of the table. The other craftsman, the other carpenter, will build his table without thinking artistically, but it'll be functionally good. It will have a beauty because functionality is beautiful, but it may not be so artistic. I think the artistry is very often an instinct and a flair and a talent, but that we should teach the craft in order for the artistry to come forward. But I'm sounding like an old man now, and I should go back to when I was a boy and learning the guitar. I went on to music college as a musician, and I studied singing because I always had a good voice. I was in many choirs. I was already working semi-professionally as a cabaret artist when I went to the Guildhall School of Music in London, which is a conservatory, a very good conservatory. And I studied singing opera. and I took the guitar as my second instrument. We had to learn the piano a bit. I think you're a pianist, aren't you, Johannes, if I remember? Is that correct?
Mm.
I think you are, yes. I had to learn the piano because this was supportive of voice study, but the guitar was my love. So as soon as I was allowed, I took the guitar as my second study. And then I started teaching the guitar while I was at the Guildhall. And I then ran a guitar school while I was still a student in London. And I started to teach in schools. And I taught in 16 schools and colleges, which supported me through college and on into the early days of my profession, when I started to perform on children's television at the same time as working as an opera singer as a young professional. So already at the beginning of my career, it was eccentric, as to use your word. But what you didn't mention, and I don't even know if you know this, is that I have a crazy skill, which is that I can talk backwards.
No.
I can talk backwards without even thinking about it. And so in my early days on television, I became, in Britain, what you might call a children's television personality. And they called me the backwards man. And I was on a regular Saturday morning children's television show and on several other shows as well. I think I was on about 6 or 7 shows for children's television for years, right up until the mid-70s. I was on children's television and on, I think, yes, on into the early 80s. I think so. I'll explain about talking backwards. I see everything forwards and backwards. I see shapes forwards and backwards, and I see words forwards and backwards. So that, for instance, you could say any sentence to me, and I will immediately say it from the last letter to the front letter, immediately. And of course, this was, I'll give you an example. If you said, that's a hot potato, I would say straight away, ottetop toch gestacht. Potato is ottetop, hot is toch, that's by spelling is astacht. And so children used to phone in the television station, BBC television, and challenge me. And of course, because repeating something forwards and backwards is the same to me, of course, I never got it wrong, but it was very useful. It got me lots of other children's television. And that went on until I joined the Royal Shakespeare Company as a musician, because I could play the lute and the guitar. So I was a minstrel. And then it became harder for my agent. They didn't really know what I was. Now you, Johannes, today, you are multi-talented. You do many things. You're an actor, you're a musician, you're a judoist, you're a presenter, you're a public speaker, and an influencer, and an important human being. But when I was your age, we didn't do so many things. People were suspicious of you if you were what we used to call multi-talented. And so it was hard for my agent to represent me when I was on children's television talking backwards 1 minute and working with the Royal Shakespeare Company the next minute. And as I moved more into theatre and started taking major roles in the classics, I had to make a kind of choice. And so I stopped doing work involving music. Occasionally, I played Blondel on television in a television series, and I had to play a little portable harp. I did that, for instance, but that was like an acting role with music. But it was many years before I went back on the stage as a singer, before I felt secure enough as an actor to risk performing in a major way as a singer. It was years, and society changed in that time, and it became possible to be an actor who sings or a singer who acts.
So wait. I want you to, because we talk about so many things and that's super interesting, of course, but I would like you to say the Creativity podcast backwards, first of all.
The Creativity
The
podcast.
Creativity podcast.
Oh, Creativity. Okay. Podcast to suck dop itivit. Wait a minute. What is the word? Crazytivity.
It's hard.
Zark. Itiviti Zark.
Wow, did you doing it?
Zark.
Damn.
Okay, so if you want to say the Crazytivity podcast is great, then backwards that is Tarek C to suck dop itiviti Zark echt. When I hesitate, it wasn't because I can't do it backwards, it's because I couldn't remember the word forwards.
Yeah, no worries. But that's crazy, man. I remember you told me you made sentences for me when we met a couple of times. You did it, and I was like, this is so crazy. But of course, everything you said is way more interesting about your career in acting and your identity and all that. And I want to come back to that. It's
I think I might have been a bit boring. Once I get on to my thing about mystique and technique and about art and craft and so on.
It was one of my questions anyways.
Guiding mantras.
It was one of my questions, but maybe for people listening to us, they wanted to know a little bit about your beginnings. If you come out of you were saying, I studied music and then I started singing and I'm into that and I'm a semi-pro. And so how did you get your first gigs? What was your mindset when you started? For people who want to, young people looking at this podcast, maybe. Okay, what can you say about that?
Well, I'll tell you what I did, and then if that is useful to young people listening, they can do the same. But it came out of a passionate need to perform. I'm afraid I'm a whore. I'm a prostitute. I can't get enough of it. From when I was a small boy, I was always a show-off. And at every opportunity, I showed off. So I had a really good voice, even as a boy soprano. And then when my voice broke, it was still a good voice. I was a baritone. I started singing in church choirs and then in non-church choirs. And then as soon as I learned the guitar at the age of 14, I remember I had been playing the guitar for 1 month and I went to a folk concert at which there was two quite famous folk singers performing. And during the performance, I got out of my chair and I went round the back of the stage and asked if there was anybody there, like a manager or somebody. And a man came over to me and I said, "Can I perform today?" And he said, "Yeah, of course you can." After they finished, and I did. And I'd only been playing the guitar for a month. I sang a Joan Baez song, a folk song. It was a Negro spiritual, actually, I remember. Anyway, so at every opportunity I performed, and because I had a good voice, I then auditioned and got into the conservatory to study singing with a view to becoming a singer. I did not know that my career would take me into theatre eventually.
And so you never thought of a normal job in any case, right?
No, never, at any time. Yeah. When I was a little boy, people used to say to me, "Oh, what do you want to do when you grow up?" And I used to say, I want to be a singer. When my son was a little boy, he was very keen on dancing. And so he used to say, "I want to be a dancer when I grow up." And then one day, when he was about 9, somebody at school said to him, "Dancing is for girls. It's a sissy thing. It's a girl's thing, dancing." So the next time somebody asked Ben, my son Ben, asked him what he wanted to do when he grew up, he said, "I'm going to be a dancing policeman."
That's even worse.
Yeah, but a policeman is more manly.
I know.
In fact, of course, he's an actor and a very good actor.
Yeah, and it's great. I met him and several times, and it's your son. It's your son. He's great. And he has the same kind of energy. I love that. But also when you are this kind of person who can do many things, and you can sing and you can play guitar. And I know, remember we talked about that once, because as a magician, it's kind of the same. Every time you go to a party or you go somewhere, people see you as this amusement guy, oh, you're invited to the party, bring the guitar. And you're like, am I really invited, or am I invited to
Yeah.
play, So how did you manage that?
Well, I was aware that I got invited to parties because of the guitar, but I loved that. So that wasn't a problem for me. That became a problem 20 years later when I was in my 40s, and my wife and I would be asked out, and they would say, would you bring your guitar? And then sometimes I resented it. I always said yes, but sometimes I didn't like it as much because I just wanted to go out. Also because it was what I did for a living. That was my profession. And so I didn't always want to do that. When I became a full-time actor, from about 1979, I suppose, I was working as an actor more than half the time. And when I became more of an actor, especially touring in America, which I did a lot of, I spent 6 years there altogether. Wow. In America, people would sometimes, if you were at a party and they say, what do you do? And you say, I'm an actor. What sort of acting do you do? Oh, I do Shakespeare, I do the classics. Oh, do some Shakespeare now, they would say.
Out of context.
I hate that.
Yeah.
I know, it's wrong. I think that I shouldn't hate it as much as I do. But when we act, we go into a state, we concentrate. And at a party with a glass of beer in your hand, you don't want to stop suddenly and go, tomorrow and tomorrow. You don't want to go and be Macbeth at a party. You want to be at a party,
Yeah. No, that's for sure. And so yeah, that's.
But you know all about it because you're a magician, and you know what happens if you have a talent for entertainment and people invite you to a party. I'm guilty because I have grandchildren, and I once, you volunteered the other time, but I once asked. Yeah, I did. But I was aware. I did know that I asked you, and I felt some guilt.
But first of all, this is different when it's your friend. First of all, when it's your friend asking, yes. and that he has amazing and so cute grandchildren, I did it with pleasure. Then also because you knew and you experienced that, you asked differently, and that's also something you ask from an artist to an artist is different. I think it's from people who don't know what it is to feel like that. And it's different. They invite you. I mean, we invited each other many times without that. It's not a problem. It's just people invite you and they say, oh, and you bring some magic, and it's kind of, it's the long term, like you say, it's after a while. And when you're with your wife and you're like, oh, well, can we talk about, life subjects too? Or do we have to dance in front of you? There's some kind of dancing monkey kind of thing. But,
there is that. And Johannes, when I was a young performer, I entertained royalty. I entertained
I remember you told me
all kinds of wealthy people. And some of the expectations and some of the treatment I received went very deep. And many years later, I played Feste from Twelfth Night, which you may or may not know, but it's a Shakespeare play. And Feste is a clown. He's Shakespeare's most famous clown, but he is also an employee of an aristocrat. And the aristocrat asks him to sing. And when I played that part, it was a Royal Shakespeare Company production, which we traveled around America. When I played that part, I do not want to sound pretentious, Johannes, but I found my entire motivation from my own old anger with the aristocracy from the way I was treated.
Yeah.
You would arrive at a palace. They would send you down to the kitchen to change. When I entertained the Queen Mother's sister at a private party in London, they told me to wait outside the door and that the butler would let me in, that I was to sing to her as much as she wanted. And when I left, I was to back out of the room. I was not to turn my back on her. I was to call her Your Highness. And so I waited outside the door, and the butler knocked on the door, and a voice said, "Come." And I went into the room, and the door was closed behind me, and I was alone in the room with this old lady sitting in a big oak throne, a huge throne.
Yeah.
And there was a chair in front of her for me to sit on. And she said, "Young man, what are you going to sing for me?"
Oh my God, so awkward.
It was. I told her my first song, and I sat down. She said nothing. She just sat. She was dressed in crinoline and satin and silk, white, just like the Queen in Alice in Wonderland, or is it Alice Through the Looking Glass? And I sang one line of my first song, which was the Queen of Hearts, and it goes like this: "To the Queen of Hearts is the ace of sorrow. He's here today." And it should go on, "But he's gone tomorrow." But at that point, I saw her lips moving, and I heard a croaky sound, and I stopped singing. And she said, "Young man, you bore me."
Oh no.
Yes, she did. "Young man, you bore me."
Oh,
So I said,
God.
"I'm sorry, Your Highness." And I stood up and I backed out of the room carrying my guitar. I had sung half of one line of one song.
Oh my God.
And
Yeah,
when
that's...
I got out through the door, the man who threw the party was called Dr. Honeywell of Honeywell Computers. He was the boss of Honeywell Computers. He's
Okay.
long since dead. And he said, "What happened? What happened?" And I told him. And he said, "Fucking women. I won't have any more fucking women at my parties."
Yeah. That's so sick. What the hell?
Okay, you're French. He was the boyfriend. He was an old man, but his partner was a man called Colonel Freddy, who was General de Gaulle's political advisor during the war.
Wow.
And after the war in London, when de Gaulle in exile came to London, Colonel Freddy was his political advisor. And Colonel Freddy, when I entertained at the party, was dying. He was upstairs in the house in a big four-poster bed with a purple hat on, a fez, you know, a fez hat with a little tassel. And Dr. Honeywell said, "You must come and sing to Freddie then. Come and sing to Freddie instead." And so I went upstairs, and Colonel Freddy spoke perfect French. Okay. So I sang French folk songs. In those days, I had a big repertoire of French folk songs. I sang French folk songs all afternoon to this lovely old man in his bed, this very excellent old man. It was that was the nice side of that horrible
that's
day.
Cool. That's cool. So yeah, well, you have crazy anecdotes. It's how did you end up doing those things for aristocracy, for such so to sing to the Queen's relations? And
yeah, it happened extraordinarily. It happened at the Guildhall, at the Conservatory. The director of music was a singer-guitarist, and he was quite well known. He did that on the side, professional, I mean. And when he wasn't available for gigs, I replaced him. It was his idea, because he'd seen me do concerts at college. And so I moved straight in at a high level, performing. I was earning more money a week when I was a student than my father earned in a month.
Wow.
Yeah. By doing this, I performed all over the country. I did cabaret. I was the lounge cabaret at the London Hilton for 4 years. And I did nightclubs in London and so on. Just me and my guitar. Yeah.
Oh, that's what you were doing in the cabaret, singing and playing guitar. Wow.
Yeah, and then I used to do after dinner speeches as a guest of honor because of my work on the television. And then I would tell stories as well. So I used to be an anecdotalist, a raconteur, you would say in French, a raconteur with illustrating my after dinner speeches with the guitar. And I used to get huge fees for that. Johannes, I used to be very well paid for that work.
You used to. I hope you still are. Otherwise, you can come back to that.
No, I'm old now.
It doesn't work with me. No, but I'm putting myself in the shoes of listeners, and maybe they are thinking, wow, this guy has so much confidence, you know, he would just do music and singing and this and that, and whatever comes to his mind, he's just doing it. I'm oversimplifying it, of course, but maybe they are thinking, wow, you can do so many things at the same time, and at the same time teach, and at the same time talk. And so what would, if someone says to you, where does this confidence come from? Would you give back the same answer you gave before about you need to perform, or is there something else behind that?
I think there is something else. You are making me think by asking a question like that. There is something else. My father was a very confident public performer and speaker, and he was very skilled at, for instance, he could talk for 7.5 minutes, or he could talk for 45 minutes. And always there would be an arc of argument through his speech. And I might have inherited that, but I certainly studied it because I admired him for that. And it was expected of me from the age of 14. My father used to take me every Thursday down to the church and put me in the pulpit and make me read Shakespeare or the Bible while he went to the back of the church. And if he couldn't hear a consonant, I had to repeat the whole speech. I was trained as a speaker and as a performer by my father before I went to college. So I was fortunate to have a father who espoused my future career. I think there was no question that he knew I was going to be a performer. And that was what he would have liked. He did like that I went on to perform. So I think that ingredient, I must pay homage to my father. I've never done that before because I've never thought enough. I've never answered that question before. So the confidence comes from training. I had much training too. From the age of 15, I studied with very famous, very great teachers. My first teacher was a famous old baritone called Ellis Keeler. And then I studied with Walter Gruner, who was a Viennese baritone himself at the Guildhall, and a number of other very distinguished people. So I had a very classical, solid education from the age of 15 to the age of 26. That's 11 years of full-time voice training, you know.
Okay, that's important because that's, you know, from the exterior, and someone just listening to all that, they might lose confidence themselves thinking, yeah, but that's, you know, he has this gift. And I wanted to, of course, we all have a different gift and different gifts, but also wanted to demystify part of that, because I think everyone can compose with his own gift and his own capacities, and there is training behind that. So it's not like that. I know you better than people listening to that, and there is a lot of learnings, a lot of trainings, a lot of practicing. And when you were mentoring me as an actor, you made me practice things about the way I talk and breathing and projecting the voice. And I was tired. I was thinking, wow, okay, there is a lot behind that on the classical technique of acting. And by the way, talking about acting, so how did you got into acting?
So when I was at the Hilton, I was performing with a folk group who specialized in Old English song called the City Waits. They're very good. They've made many records. And the singer with the City Waits, who played the lute, had a gig with the Royal Shakespeare Company, which he couldn't do. So he asked me if I wanted to do it instead. I did that one gig, and immediately they offered me an American tour, a Swedish tour, and a European tour with the Royal Shakespeare Company.
Wow.
In a great production called The Hollow Crown, in which I worked only as a singer minstrel. I played the guitar and the lute, and I sang. They recognized that I had acting skills because of the way I sang and the way I performed the songs. And so they started to offer me other work. And I was very keen. I was very keen to do that. And so that's how that came about. And then I became an actor, really. And I stopped having a music agent, a concert agent, and I took a theater agent.
That's super interesting. It's a mix of networks, of your network, and then proving and showing what you can do. So, and this is applicable in any kind of work, by the way. So I want to put an emphasis on that for people who are not actors, who are not into music. That is something. Maybe you know a guy who knows a guy who can put you in touch, and then you prove yourself, and many doors can open, right?
And you need to watch other people. You know, it sounds as if I'm showing off, but I'm absolutely not. I'm trying to underscore my point. For instance, I have done a lot of building, a lot of plumbing, a lot of electricity, just because I don't like paying somebody else to do it. But I learned it by watching professionals. I remember the first time I watched a plumber work, I wanted to do it. So I asked him questions, many questions. The same thing with electricity. There are things we're not allowed to do. We're not allowed at home to do full gas installation, full electrical, full plumbing installation that requires the company's seal or the approval of the local authority, of course, but we can do all of the installation and stop short of the final connection. But if you watch people who are good at it and are as thrilled as I am at watching professionalism, the same thing with writing. I learned to write screenplays, not poetry. I learned to write screenplays by working on a project with a professional he was the consultant to a film that I worked on, and I worked on a script alongside him and realized that there's no mystique about this. This is technique, and I must learn it. So I learned it.
So there is something about.
And then I wrote many screenplays.
There is something about, I don't know the word in English, unveiling or revealing the mystique with the technique, with observation, right? But yes. do you ever have blocks, or do you ever think, oh, that's going to be, I'm not that kind of guy, it's not for me? And how do you work on it? Or do you ever?
Okay, I'm very practical about blocks.
Okay.
I don't respect them. I know people have blocks, but of course, a block comes out of a phobia and can become a paranoia. We all know this. So you need to deconstruct the block. So for instance, last year, I like to publish a collection of poetry every year. So that last year, for instance, I like to bring out a new collection of verse every year. And I was worried last year I didn't seem inspired to write. I would come into the office and look at the screen. I like to write on a computer on the screen. I don't write with a pen on a piece of paper like I used to, because I like the facility of instant editing. But this went on for about 2 weeks. So I rang a friend who's a painter, and I said, if I suggested to you that we do a book together, would you be interested? He's a very, very good painter. And he said, yes, tell me more. So I said, all right, you produce the painting from your existing paintings, and I will write a poem to accompany the painting. So I did 2 things. First of all, I gave myself an agenda with a switch off date.
Accountability.
And secondly, I gave myself the means for inspiration. So that, for instance, he gave me a picture of a woman with very beautiful eyes. So I wrote a poem called In Your Eyes, but the poem was actually about the power of nature. My way into that poem was through that painting. After that, he gave me a painting of an egret. That's a bird, beautiful, like a heron, similar to a heron. It's a type of heron, really. And I imagined lying on my back and seeing the bird flying over me like the spirit of somebody I used to love who may be dead. And I wrote that poem from his painting of an egret. So what I had done was to give myself 2 things. 1, a deadline, and 2, a reason for writing. So I know I sound like an old teacher now, le vieux con
it's
du
interesting.
château. But I genuinely did deconstruct my problem and come up with answers rather than wallowing in the problem and waiting for it to go away.
No, I love that. It's great. I think it's you cannot, a lot of people, I think they wait until the block dissolve itself by magic, and that never happens, and then they go on to something else, and they go with the flow, and they missed an opportunity. That's a shame. And I love how you deconstructed it, which made me think that alongside of all your activities, you always thought there's something in you that wants to give back, that wants to teach, that wants to deconstruct, that wants to help people achieve their true potential, if I can say so, right?
Yeah, this is true. And strangely, I was talking about this for another reason this week, so it's fresh in my mind. I was talking about school exams, and I remembered that I had always been bottom of the class in history.
Okay.
But I had a friend whom we did a lot of things together when we were kids. We played together. And we were going to do what were called O-levels, which is the exams you take when you're 15 in England, now in Britain. Today, they have a new name, GCSE. But in those days, they were called O-levels. And he asked me if I would coach him for the history exam, because his mother had promised him a gift or something.
Okay.
So I coached him, and guess what? I became top in the class in history that term, and I got the highest mark that anybody had ever got at the school in that particular exam.
Wow.
Because the examining board that I was examined in used to give marks. Most of them just gave grades, but they gave marks. And I got 79%, I still remember it. But I realized then that came from teaching somebody else, from deconstruction.
There are a couple of saying about that, right? There is I'm gonna paraphrase it, but there is one saying is like teaching is learning twice, and the other saying is people often teach what they need to learn the most. I've heard this saying as well.
Yeah, that's even better. So
Yeah, all right.
with the guitar, and because it was my second study, I didn't have to pass exams in it, not serious exams, simple things. But when I started to teach, my skills became very much more advanced. I became a better sight reader, which is always the problem, as you know, as you play the piano. I became a better sight reader and certainly a better technician on the guitar from doing masses and masses of teaching.
Wow.
Yeah, certainly it fed back for me into my own work. And over the years, sometimes I've helped people who had a block or a problem of some sort by finding somebody for them to teach.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I love that.
Mm.
And I think most people don't see teaching like that. They think I need to be the top expert of the highest level, which is paradoxically very funny that a lot of people that are at a high level, they're not the best teacher because they have a super
No.
hard time to deconstruct it. They wouldn't know how to explain it well. And you would need someone that is less good, that is not one of the best, but he knows you, he knows where you're at, he knows how to push you, what blocks you, how to help you deconstruct your difficulties and overcome
But
obstacles.
maybe also, Johannes, maybe this person had not had good teaching himself.
That's
Because our
one of the guys
teachers
told me
inspire
that.
us.
One of the guys told me that. He told me the way I was taught is beat the hell out of this guy, and we were laughing about it, but it's so true now that you say it. Yeah, that's super interesting.
In the theatre and television world of actors, of professional actors, in London, as you know, there is a centre for professional actors called the Actors Centre or the
I
Actors
know it.
Professional Centre. Not only do you know it, but you gave a very brilliant performance there, which I heard a lot about that
Yeah,
unfortunately wasn't able to see. And you also taught a class there brilliantly. And
yeah.
again, I heard the most wonderful things about it.
I followed your
Perhaps,
path.
yeah, maybe that's where you started your mission. Uh, it could be working with a London audience.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But Johannes, well, at the Actors Centre, I used to, for actors who sit and wait for the telephone to ring, which is common in the theatre, and receive about one telephone call a year, are actually foolishly throwing work away. I always said to young professional, well, any professional actors who attended my workshops, as I mentioned earlier, I said, do something for your career every day because you have 24 hours a day for you. And your agent has maybe a 6-hour office day with a 2-hour lunch, which is usually a business lunch. And if they have 40 clients and you divide 6 hours by 40, that's how many minutes a day they've got for you. Where you got 24 hours. That's number one. And number two, if there isn't work out there, you can create work. And so I used to teach a workshop called Writing Your Own Show. I taught that workshop for many years, and many very good shows came out of it. And I used to give the actors my leads, places I had played, producers I knew, theaters who did lunchtime theater or early evening theater. And I used to direct the actors once the shows were developed and good. I used to direct them towards work as well and help them. And then they would, in the workshop, perform for the others and they would direct each other. It was a very successful class because of firstly, the consensual aspiration of creating work. And secondly, because in itself, it was doing something about the problem.
But
So I've always been
yeah.
proactive.
I remember you told me that. I remember when you were coaching me and mentoring me. I remember you were telling me exactly this. Your little math and this advice on you have 24 hours for you, and you should do at least one thing for your career there. Remember that, and that helped me a lot. And actually, it's a very entrepreneurial way to approach an artistic career, to approach acting. And I think many people get stuck in that. I'm an actor, I'm an artist, and they don't see themselves as an entrepreneur. And I love your approach of, yes, you're an artist, but you're no different. You have a career, you're no different than another job, and you have to do something to get booked.
And Johannes, I said already that I'm 74. I still do that today. Talking to you today, and I know you're a very successful motivational speaker, and your podcasts must be watched by lots of people. I see this as an opportunity. Even though I'm trying to answer your questions and to be useful, I also know that this may be useful to me. Yesterday, for instance, I sent my most recent little collection of poems to an agent I would very much like to work with in London. This morning, I sent the same little book of poems to the publisher of a very distinguished poetry magazine that I would like to publish my work. For instance, now that's already today I've done two things for my career. I've talked to Ioannis Alignac, Butsi, the great magician, and I have sent off a project to somebody. And yesterday I did something too. And I guarantee that there is never a day when I do nothing for my career. I keep the balloons in the air all the time, always hoping one of them will come down to land.
I love that.
I still do.
I love that. It's going to be a great quote from the show. So tell us about your poetry a little bit. That's one of the topics, and we have all the topics to cover, but we have the audio recordings that you won awards for and everything. But we're talking about poetry, about your work. So tell us about your poetry. I know that this is, I can feel there is a part of your heart in your poetry, in this work. Is really, now we're talking art. There is craft, but now we're talking serious inspiration and art. So tell us about that.
Well, I have always written poetry since I was a little boy, always. Okay. And I have written poetry for many reasons. I've written it for love. I've written it for loss. I've written it for anger. I have written it as an exercise. I have started a poem many times when I didn't have a poem in my mind, and it has turned quickly into something important for me. I am interested in form. You will not be surprised to learn. I very much like structured verse. I have written quite a lot of more prosaic free verse, like all poets, but I am particularly interested in the sonnet. I've published a whole book of sonnets. I've published a book about writing sonnets, how to write a sonnet.
Tell us what, for stupid people like me and stupid other listeners, what is sonnets? What do you like about that? How does it work?
There are several forms of sonnets, Ioannis, but the form I like best is the Shakespearean sonnet. It works very well in French, by the way, the sonnet. Okay. It is, first of all, it is in pentameter, which means there are 5 metrical feet in every line. Secondly, it has a fixed rhyming scheme. Thirdly, it's mostly iambic, but not necessarily.
Okay.
Fourthly, it's 14 lines long, and it must finish on a rhyming couplet.
So it's very technical.
Yes, it is.
Say so. Yeah.
And in a more general way, usually you have 8 lines of exposition, 4 lines of development of that, and 2 lines of conclusion. Okay. Or 4 lines of statement, 8 lines of exposition, and 2 lines of conclusion. So it's it is complicated, but I love that. It's much, much more complicated than the haiku, for instance, which is short and succinct and is a very beautiful thing to craft, but it's a bigger problem.
I was about to
love
say,
that.
I was about to say, we're coming back to the craft again, right?
Yeah.
So is it a hard craft to learn?
Well, I would say that everybody will write poetry differently, and that if I had a student, I would not try to encourage them to write like me. I would try and see what their strong points were, and then I would foster those. So I don't think you should set yourself the problem of trying to do a certain kind of poem. If somebody has a sufficient interest in the technical problems of dealing with a complicated convention like the sonnet, then I would love to help them to do that. And I have many times done that. Even my grandchildren have written sonnets, and they're small, but of course with my help. But then I would love to teach them to do that. But I think, for instance, the wonderful Amanda Gorman, who recited at the inauguration of Joe Biden, thank God,
Yeah.
that we've seen the back of the orange mobster, and we now have what seems to me to be very likely a very great man in charge. And this wonderful little black girl, Amanda Gorman,
I saw
who
that,
is the Children's Poet Laureate in America, and now the Poet Laureate officially, wrote this lovely piece. It wasn't structured, but it was full of swinging rhymes, rather like in rap, and very, very brilliantly performed and fabulous. It was a wonderful moment. I'm glad to see poetry coming forward, you know.
It's good. It's good to put forward a young person doing that as well, because it might not seem the kind of thing that is super hype amongst young people, right? But it's very interesting, and so it doesn't have to be structured. And performance is an element as well. You said it was well performed. Okay, it's interesting.
I can say for sure, 100%, that everything I write, I can hear as well. When I write it. I'm always interested in, for instance, somebody who writes for singing, needs to know the good vowels to sing on. You shouldn't have a long note on the E vowel, for instance.
Yeah.
It's horrible. E is a horrible vowel to sing. R is a lovely vowel to sing. Unless you are deliberately making it ugly for dramatic reasons. You need to know that. And so as an actor writing poetry, I'm very aware of how the poems would perform and how they sound. And I am considering a section in my next collection called Performance Poems, or Poems for Performance. I am considering that in my book about writing sonnets called Sonnets for the Godly and the Damned. I actually talk about poetry, the sonnet, as a vehicle for performance. It does interest me a lot.
That's super interesting. We're going to put a lot of links for people who are curious to know about the different books you wrote about your poetry. I've bought one, Under the Blue, yes.
Yes.
And I've read it.
Collection.
But I have to say, I'm not the best person to. I couldn't understand everything, first of all, because it's in English and it's a very, the words are quite difficult for me, but I loved it. I loved it, but it was almost too much for me. But for sure that I need to read more and to get more accustomed to that form.
Yeah, but you know, Johannes, that was in 2015. And if you got it then or soon after, your English wasn't as masterly as it is now. I think you might find now, if you read it again now, some of the poems in that book are cryptic. It's true. Some are difficult. But for instance, the very first poem in that collection is called The Appointment. And The Appointment is about a walk I had on our mountain. Your country house, your country home is at the foot of the mountain. And at the top of the mountain, there is the Château de Frissac, where once upon a time, the mistress of Henri, le roi de France, Henri de Navarre, he became king, and she was his mistress, and she lived there. She was described by a contemporary as having des cuisses longues et des fesses insolentes.
You need to translate that in English.
She had long thighs and a pert bottom, or an insolent buttocks. She had long thighs and insolent buttocks.
I love that.
But anyway, the poem is a narrative poem. On New Year's Eve 2014-15, I walked up there at midnight, and I sat on the hill. There was mist below me in the valley, and I could see lights in the distance on other hills. And suddenly my horse joined me. He was up there with the herd. And at that time, I think we had 7 horses, and he left the other horses and came to me and stood behind me and put his head on my shoulder. And it was a moment of brotherhood with my horse. It was very thrilling. And the poem I wrote linked him and me with all the horsemen and horses who've gone up and down that mountain through the centuries, because the ground floor of the chateau was built in the 8th century at the end of Roman times. And then in the 13th century, it was in the Crusades, and it was built up into the medieval chateau that we know today. And suddenly I had a sense of being part of that history. I didn't go up there to write a poem, but it's one of my 2 or 3 favorite poems. It was inspired entirely by the fact that my horse joined me. And if ever you look at it again, you'll see that it's free verse.
I have it.
It has a little rhyming scheme. There's if you look at the verses, you'll see the rhymes, how I dot them within each verse. But it's not a classical poem. But that very much came from the heart. And it's about the brotherhood of living things, animals and humans.
Nice. So tell us a couple of titles of your book, and we put the links below. So if people want to go further, they can follow the links. Yeah, of course. So you were talking about the 50 sonnets, I think.
Well, my most recent book is called 50 Sonnets, and you can find it on Amazon. If you go to my author page, I think I sent you the link for that.
Yeah, okay, I'll share it in the links.
Okay, great. Thank you, Johannes. That's called 50 Sonnets. And the book before that contains quite a lot of poems which are not sonnets. And that was called Wine and Cake and Cream. And that's a collection of poems of all types. And then the collection before that was called Sonnets for the Godly and the Damned. And that is to help people who want to write sonnets, poets who are scared of the sonnet. It's to encourage poets to write sonnets. And the book before that is Under the Blue. And I published a little collection of my poetry in French called Poésie, which is on my author page. I don't know if you've got that.
I think I saw that. So I got actually one of the first books. I didn't know. I thought there were.
Well, not my first book, but you got my first published collection.
Yeah.
Because before that, I published in magazines and things a few times. I wrote a book you would love called, which was published in 1995, I think, called Theatrical Letters. And that is now out of print. but I'll give you a copy when I see you. But
Okay.
there are second-hand copies. If people Google it, they'll find on eBay and on Amazon, they'll find second-hand copies. It's called Theatrical Letters by Bill Homewood. And it's a great book. It's a collection, it's a collection of letters by actors and actor managers throughout 400 years of English-speaking theatre. There's a lot of very, very funny material in there, and I recommend the book. I have no idea why it was allowed to go out of print, but it did. But
Okay.
you can still find
we put all the links
copies.
and
Thank you.
no, that's super cool. I think it ought to be more famous, to be more. I certainly don't know enough about poetry, for sure. And so you are doing those audio recordings. I'm gonna
audiobooks.
find, just because I don't want to miss that, because it's a big part of your life. And you, as I said in the intro, you won many awards for that. So let's see the timeline again. You started as a musician, and slowly, and at the same time, you had this a BBC show for children, and you had this solo act, basically. That's how we can put it. And you transition into acting, right?
Yeah, through my work as a musician with the Royal Shakespeare Company. But I was by then presenting on television.
Yeah.
And so in a way, actors do that usually. It's unusual for a musician to do that. So in many ways, I was already working as an actor.
Yeah. And then, so we're going to talk about the acting thing a little bit after. And so from acting, how did you end up in this audio recording world? How can I say that? Audio.
Okay, well, this is great for your podcast, actually, because there's a magazine called Stage Magazine.
Okay.
And it has classified advertisements in it. And people always used to say, oh, you'll never get a job from Stage Magazine. They just put those in because they're classifieds and they have to do it. But in fact, I was looking in the back of Stage Magazine, looking for work at a time when I didn't have any work. And there was an advertisement from somebody saying, if you would like to read an audiobook, ring this number. So I rang the number, and a guy I didn't know answered, and he said, I'll meet you on King's Cross Station tonight at 6 o'clock for a beer. He was going home from London, and so I met him at the station that night. We had a beer, and he offered me the Notre Dame, the Bossu de Notre Dame. Hugo's great book. We call it The Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Yeah.
The French title, Notre Dame de... I've forgotten the French title. I just cannot believe that that's happened.
I'm going to Google it at the same time.
Anyway, whatever it is, I can't remember. And The Hunchback of Notre Dame was my first recording for him. And I did it in the studio the next day.
Notre Dame de Paris is the title. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the Notre Dame de Paris. So I should maybe start that story again.
It's all right. It's good. Okay. Go on. You know the title.
Anyway, so after that, he was called Nicholas Soames, and he had just founded Naxos Audiobooks, which the Naxos music catalog is the biggest in the world. It's huge. And he had a good idea. He was a music critic. He had an idea of founding an audiobook company within the umbrella of Naxos. So he did, and I was one of his first readers. And I worked with Nicholas for 20 years, recording great, great classics, mainly French classics. Because I speak French, I can pronounce all the proper names quite easily without having to look them up or change gear, or clear my throat every time.
That's cool.
And then they got to the cafe and they sat down and they had
Yeah.
Bouillabaisse, that stuff. I don't have to do that like most English actors have to, so because of having French. And so I did all those great French classics for Nicholas, and then he finally retired about 4 years ago, and Naxos is now run by somebody else in America and in Britain, and they continue. At the moment, I'm doing 3 books from La Comédie Humaine de Balzac. I've done Père Goriot, La Bouilleuse, and I'm about to do Le Colonel Chabert.
And
Le Colonel Chabert.
How long does it take for you to? How long does it take to record such? Some of the classics are huge.
Huge.
So it takes a long time to record, no?
Yeah, Les Miserables, which is a 52 CD box set.
Oh,
and it's 60 or 65 hours long.
Wow.
That took 6 weeks working in the mornings. I just work mornings, I get out of bed in my pajamas. I have a studio at home. I roll into the studio early in the morning before the donkeys bray, before the birds sing, and I do 2 or 3 hours of recording, and then I go back in the house and I have a cup of coffee.
So for people who don't know you,
it takes a long time.
For people who don't know you, I think we have to precise some things, that you have a lot of animals where you live, right? You have horses, donkeys, dogs, and cats. And what is the count?
And a wife. She's the noisiest of all of them.
We haven't said, by the way, I wanted to start like that, but you went off many interesting things that I couldn't. No, it was perfect. But you said to me, and I know you're joking about Estelle, who was one of the greatest actress in Britain, Great Britain, in the Royal Shakespeare Company for dozens of years. That she's kind of your muse as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, she was an iconic actress before I knew her. And of course, I knew her work on television, and I'd seen her in all kinds of things. Estelle Kohler is her name. And Estelle was the leading lady, or one of the 2 or 3 leading ladies at the Royal Shakespeare Company at the time. I mean, Dame Helen Mirren, who is very famous today, at one time was Estelle's understudy, for instance. Estelle goes back a long way. And I admired her tremendously. And so when the Royal Shakespeare Company put on an evening in London, a gala evening, which I've got the poster on my wall still to this day.
I remember.
In November the 7th, 1976. And we did 3 weeks or 2 weeks of rehearsals for that. And Estelle was in the cast, and so was I. That's when I first met her. And then a few months later, they engaged me to do a tour to America and to Israel and to play big festivals, the Israel Festival, I think at the time it was called the Jerusalem Festival, and to do a tour across America playing huge theaters. And Estelle was in the West End in a play by Tennessee Williams, which collapsed. The play went bankrupt. She was playing the lead. So suddenly she was available. So the Royal Shakespeare Company got her back for this tour. And 3 days later, we were together, and we've never been apart since. And that was 44 years ago.
Wow. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, 1976. So 1977 it was, so 44 years ago, yeah.
That's amazing. And now you surrounded yourself with this common passion of animals, and you have horses and donkeys. Every time I come to your places, for me, it's, I'm a city guy, so for me, it's a bit dangerous for me, but then I know that it's not.
Was always, I'm so sorry, I interrupted you. I didn't mean to.
It's not. Don't worry.
Yeah, I was going to say, but it's always been a working partnership. Now we have the horses, and we have 28 acres, 11 hectares of mountain land, of hill land. And that's a lot of work for Estelle and me, but we love it. But it started with work within 3 months of our working together, I had written a piece with Estelle, which was a dramatization of the Song of Songs from the Old Testament, sometimes called the Song of Solomon. And we took that back as a pair the following year to the Jerusalem Festival, just the two of us independently. And we did many, many plays together, which we wrote, recitals and plays. And I played the guitar, I played music in as well as acting. And we, cool. I mean, we traveled those shows for 15 years continuously. Whenever we didn't have regular work, we toured our shows, and we had agents in New York and London booking us. But we got that. We didn't have silver spoon in our mouth. We chased it. We wrote it and chased it and got it.
Yeah, I bet. Knowing you, I bet. That's really cool. And so, okay, so you were saying you work in the mornings and all the animals don't bother you. That's what we were saying. And so it takes a long time. You were saying 6 weeks for like the 52 CD Misérables. So it's a big thing. And you know, from you, I've listened Le Rouge et le Noir, the red and the black. I don't know in English.
Yeah, standard. The red and the black.
Yeah, okay, same. Yeah, I loved it. I loved it. It's very vivid. So it leads me to my question: what makes a good audio recording? What you know? For me, I don't know. I'm listening. I'm like, oh, nice, but I don't know the technical, the craft again. So, what makes a good audio recording?
Well, I'll tell you what I do that works for me, which is 3 weeks before I start a recording, if I have that much time, I start to warm my voice up at night before I go to bed so that it's clean. Because if you don't use your voice professionally for a period of time and you have ice cream and cheese and dairy products and stuff, it can get a bit husky. So first of all, I look after the voice and I get it good. It takes me 3 weeks to be perfect, but I can make it good enough in about a week. Secondly, I sit close to the microphone, very close, actually 32 centimeters from my mouth to the microphone, exactly. Okay. I have the microphones offset slightly to one side, and I have the script on an iPad so that I can scroll it with, what's it called? With a thing. Instead of my finger, I use a, whatever it's called. I can't think of the name.
Like a pen, kind of?
On the end. Yeah,
okay,
I can't think of the name.
I forgot as well.
Yeah, but anyway, the reason for that is so there are no page turns to edit out the noise of the page turning. Then I use an app called iAnnotate, and I put it as a PDF into iAnnotate so that I can then, if I have to say the same thing 3 times because I trip on a word, or if I have to stop and do some research, or check the original translation because I don't believe it, or whatever, then I leave the digital recorder rolling, but I mark in the script the pause, and then I have as agreed with the producers at Naxos, a range of hieroglyphics which represent what I'm doing. If I have to stop for a pause, I mark it. If I have to repeat something, I mark it. If I have to change the text, which is very unusual because Naxos are very, very careful, but if I do have to change the text because of a bad translation or whatever, then I mark that in blue and I type it into the script because the app allows it. But you don't want to know all that technical stuff.
It's very precise. There's a lot of precision, right?
Yeah, but I don't do a lot of preparation about the book. Okay. I know the synopsis. I know the synopsis. I check ahead at a glance to see if I'm suddenly going to have to read 2 pages of Latin or something, or Hebrew or Irish, or if there are any big deal accent jobs coming up in the chapter. But I do not read the book first. I let it unfold. I sight read my recordings always. I always have done. That way, I'm excited. I want to know what's next. It gives me momentum emotionally and intellectually. Um, and I have to do, maybe 30 to 40 minutes at a time so that the individual files are easier to upload and download. At the end of the recording, I upload the files to Dropbox, or I send them by WeTransfer or some other device to the sound editor. The sound editor takes out all the glitches. He compresses it a little bit to get rid of noises around and so on for people who want to listen in their cars. And then they send it to a listener, and the listener checks for any mistakes I may have made with pronunciation or anything that the sound engineer missed. And then I do any retakes, and then they produce it. It's the Naxos production ethic is very, very high. I respect the company very much indeed, and I like to work for them because of this level of professionalism and of courtesy and care for their listener. They are very careful indeed. But I think what I should really say is what makes a good recording is intimacy. I don't want to sound precious again, but I would say I think of my listener as being in bed with me. It's pillow talk. I speak low, and that gives me room for a range. I characterize all dialogue.
Yeah, I remember that. It was funny.
I don't report it. I characterize it. And the problem I give myself is that if you characterize, you must remember, because if you have an innkeeper, Monsieur le Patron of un café, and on page 3, and you don't see him again until page 303, and he's 20 years older, but on page 3, you chose that he came from the north in the accent, in the dialect, then you gotta remember. And if it's Hugo or if it's Dumas, then you've probably seen 80 people between. So you need to keep notes. And last year, I recorded a fabulous book called Le Mort d'Arthur. Le Mort d'Arthur. Incorrect French, but medieval. A fantastic book. It's the legend of King Arthur. And I recorded that for Naxos. That too is huge. I don't know, it's out now. It's a double box set about that big. I don't know how many CDs. I recorded that, and it had 150 different characters in it.
Wow.
And I had to distinguish between knights and damsels and dragons and sorcerers and so on.
No, it's a big work. It's a big work. I know. I really advise people to listen to at least one of your audiobooks, because for me, actually, I think you got me into audiobooks because it's the first time I listened to audiobooks. I think it was yours, and then I listened to many others on different topics. But then I don't read and I don't listen to a lot of stories and novel and classics. It's more about self-development. But I came across one of the recordings, and I don't say that to flatter your ego or whatever, but I came across another guy and I was like, he cannot do the voice like Bill does the voice.
Yeah, I like it.
It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool that we can feel, first of all, we can feel the intimacy that we're talking about, and we can feel definitely it brings a lot of value that you have this acting background and that you can really bring the emotion to the character. It's not just the voice, it's just it's really, so yeah, it's pretty cool. If you guys have the chance to check the book, one of the audiobooks, I highly recommend it. So I'm not gonna take too much of your time. I know you're losing some light here, and we have been for 1.5 hours already. So
Have we? Wow.
yeah, it's pretty goes pretty fast, which is longer than any other episodes, which I'm happy about that. And I we didn't talk too much about acting. We talked about here and there because your career was really multidimensional. And uh, I had one question that I really wanted to ask you about acting, so I'm going to come back to that, which is, we can say, maybe the center of your career, acting, and things
Yes.
gravitated about that. Yeah.
Yes.
And there's something you told me a while ago. You said to me, acting is a beautiful craft, but it's a horrible job. Did I say right? Was it like that?
I don't remember saying that, but it can be a tough job. But yeah, yeah. But
Do
you
you
know,
do you still think so?
um, it's I probably was trying to put you off doing it because I think if we want to do it, then nobody can stop us.
Hmm.
And so it is not a bad thing to say to somebody, I don't recommend it because it's a lot of work for very little money. Very, very few people earn a living wage as actors. Something like 94% of actors are out of work most of the time. And only, I think the figure was 16% of actors can truthfully say, of professional actors can truthfully say that that is how they earn their living throughout their career. So it's a very tough profession, but if you want to do it, nobody's going to stop you. My inspiration throughout my acting career has been Maya Estelle. I can truthfully say that to see Estelle on stage thrilled me so much. That's what I wanted to be. And working with Estelle on stage was always very thrilling. I've worked with a few other actors who affected me in the same way. And I would say that's got a lot to do with it too. The joy, if you're going to do it and you do it, then the joy is not only a solo thing. The joy is the collaboration and the teamwork. And sometimes what I have with Estelle on stage is the magic bounce off another person who is giving all the time, giving to the audience, giving back to you, responding like a tennis ball that keeps coming back at you, and you've got to keep batting away. It's fantastically exciting. And so I would say, yeah, it's a difficult profession. I wouldn't recommend anybody to go into it. But if you want to go into it, nobody's going to stop you. And if you do it, it's fantastic.
Do you think it's harder today because there are a lot of more actors, or the landscape changed or something like that?
You mean pre-COVID?
No.
At the moment, yeah.
I mean, 30 years ago versus today. We're not talking about COVID.
No, I think it's better today.
Okay.
Because it comes back to our talk about being multi-talented like you. That is respected today. When I was a young singer, there was an attitude to actors singing. So that if you were in a show and they gave a part to somebody who was an actor and you were in a musical show, then you didn't always feel respect for their singing, and it wasn't always very good. And if you were an actor and you were in a show in which one musician had to do some acting, you would have a similar attitude. But I've seen that change. What used to be called musical comedy is now called musical theatre. And in the West End, once COVID is over and all the shows open again, the stages of the West End in London and in Paris are filled with people who can act and who can sing.
Yeah.
And in many cases, who can dance. And in some cases, who can do magic. You know, I think we live in a multi-talented world where multi-talent is respected. And I think that has been a positive thing. So I would say it's probably a better world today for the actor, though I know it's still very tough. Of course, I worked at the Conservatoire in Montpellier, a very great French drama school, conservatory. And I've kept in touch with many of my students from when I was teaching there today, and a good percentage, because they were already a remarkable group, but a good percentage are still working, but only a minority are still working professionally in the theatre in a substantial way. So it's still a tough profession.
It's interesting. And how did you solve that identity, that problem, that identity feel, if I can say so, of being a multi-dimensional, multi-talented guy that you are? How did
Honestly,
you? Yeah. How did? Yeah.
No, sorry. Once again, I keep doing it. I'm so keen to interrupt you all the time.
No worries, no worries. I was finished. I was trying to precise more.
But I'll tell you, honestly, by anger and my own rejection of things, what I did was I said, I'm not a singer now, I'm an actor. I got a theater agent. I got rid of my concert agent. I refused concerts. I stopped booking musical work. I just did the classics until I was accepted. And then I started to take musical theater jobs in the West End, things like Grand Hotel and Jesus Christ Superstar and Phantom of the Opera, those sort of shows. I did those shows and felt okay about it. But that meant I'd grown up, I think. I think I was maturer and the world had changed a little bit. And there was no longer suspicion of and hostility towards multi-talented people. So I think many things went hand in hand. But I can genuinely say that I did it at first by simply rejecting music. I went from being a concert singer. I specialized in Lieder, German Lied. I sang a lot of Lieder and quite a lot of what we used to call chanson, the French art songs that baritones like Pierre Bernac, the great Pierre Bernac, would record in France. He was an influence on my own work. And one of my teachers was a protege of Bernac himself. And so there was something of that handed down. But I went from that world to the theater, and to be taken seriously in theater, I had to, in those days, I had to push that away. I don't think it would be the same today. I wouldn't feel the same fear of being, of not being taken seriously as an actor today. I think things have changed, Johannes.
That's great. So I'm going to leave you to your things. I'm taking so much of your time already. It's great. I want people to know where they can find you on Twitter, Facebook. I don't know, what are you on?
On Twitter, I'm called @the_Facebook_poet.
Okay.
And I do that deliberately because then I can link people to my Facebook poetry page. I have an ordinary Facebook account, but I have a page I manage, which is called, wait for it, facebook.com/Bill Homewood's Poem a Week by Me for You, all one word.
We'll put it in the link.
Poem a Week by Me for You. And every week I post a new poem I've written on that site. Occasionally, instead of a poem, I put up an advertisement for one of my books or something. Because the whole idea is to get people to know about my poetry and to buy my books, which they can then order on Amazon. So that's how I use it. I literally use, I think we must be entertaining if we do Facebook and Twitter. But I have a criterion, I have an aspiration. It is to persuade people to buy my books.
No, but it's I'm sure it's great to follow you and to discover all your poems every week. So we'll put all the links below.
Thank you, Johannes.
I want to say thank you for everything. You've been an amazing inspiration for me before the podcast, long before, and in this podcast as well. I learned many things. So I'm gonna rewatch it, re-listen to it. And for people who wants to listen to it or to your audiobooks or anything, all the links are below. There are going to be a lot of links considering everything you did. So thank you again, Bill. And maybe I see you on another time on the Creativity Podcast.
Oh, I hope so, Johannes. I really hope so. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you. All right. Bye-bye. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.